My name is Madeline Brooks. I'm 29 years old and I've treated wounded soldiers in blackout tents with bullets snapping past my ears, but nothing shook me like the sound of my grandfather's voice in that voicemail. The message came through just after chow on a Thursday. The kind of evening when most families are sitting down for dinner. His voice was thin, nearly a whisper, saying my name, then saying he wasn't feeling right, that he'd tried calling my parents, but no one was picking up. I played it again, the same tremble, same quiet panic. I knew that tone. It was the voice of someone who didn't think they had much time left. Before I go any further, drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever had to be the one who showed up when no one else did, make sure to hit like and subscribe. I enlisted straight out of high school. Never been one to wait around for someone else to step up. I trained as a combat medic, did 2 tours in Iraq, spent most days running toward chaos instead of away from it. Our unit was a tight one, bonded by dirt sweat and the kind of trust you only earn when lives are on the line. We weren't just teammates, we were family. And that made it even harder when I started falling apart in the middle of the mess. Tense, staring at a message from the man who'd raised me. I hadn't even finished my plate when Captain Dawson sat across from me and said, "Whatever it is, handle it." Growing up, my parents were always too busy with their lives to be parents in any real sense. They moved us from one state to another, chasing new job titles and personal breakthroughs. But Grandpa Walter stayed constant when they left me for a summer that turned into a year. He took me in. No questions asked. His house in the Denver suburbs wasn't big or fancy, but it smelled like sawdust and old books, and the porch swing still creaked in rhythm. Every evening I tried calling my mom first, then Dad, then Brandon. Each one went to voicemail. No callbacks, no texts. Nothing. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't want to give them a heads up if they were hiding something. I wanted to see it myself. Captain Dawson signed off on emergency leave by the weekend. I was on a flight halfway across the world. Coming back to the States after Iraq always felt surreal, too quiet, too clean. I took a cab from the airport to Grandpa's house and everything looked still. The lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. Newspapers stacked on the porch, the curtains drawn tight just like he used to do when he wasn't feeling well. I found the spare key under the fake rock, same place it had always been, and opened the door. The smell hit first, thick and wrong like spoiled food and medicine, the kind of air that clings to hospitals and hospice rooms. I called out his name, got nothing back. I found him upstairs, curled under a thin blanket, barely conscious, his face sunken, his breathing faint. I touched his wrist and felt the pulse. They're weak, like a thread about to snap. I called 911 and gave them everything I had. Age, vitals, symptoms, medication list. What was missing? How long I suspected he'd been down for when the paramedics arrived. I told them I was a combat medic, and they let me stay close. Shannon Reyes, the lead paramedic, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Another day and he might not have made it." I rode in the back of the ambulance, clutching Grandpa's hand like I used to when I was little. I didn't cry. Not then. I just kept thinking about that voicemail and how long he must have waited before finally calling me. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It wasn't an accident. Someone had let this happen, and I was going to find out who. The emergency room was quiet except for the hum of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses moving down the corridor. I sat in a stiff-backed chair, Grandpa's wallet and phone in my hands, watching the double doors to the ICU. A doctor had updated me just after they got him stabilized: severe dehydration, early signs of pneumonia, and weeks of missed medications. They'd gotten fluids into him in time, but just barely. He was unconscious when I arrived, and though his pulse had steadied, they weren't sure when or if he'd fully come around. I unlocked his phone, looking for answers. A text thread with my mom was the first thing I saw. 3 weeks earlier, he'd sent her a message, "Not feeling well. Trouble with meds. Can you come by?" She'd answered the next morning with "Busy with work, Dad. Call a neighbor." A few days later, he'd reached out to Brandon asking him to stop in. Brandon had replied, "I've got it covered," then nothing. The very next day, they'd flown out to Hawaii. I opened Facebook on my own phone and scrolled until I found the photos. There they were, my parents Brandon and his wife, all smiles at a beachfront resort. My dad had his arm around my mom's shoulder, wine glasses raised. A caption below said, "Paradise Vibes." Another showed Brandon's son splashing in a pool while his wife held up a piña colada. That one was posted 2 days after Grandpa's last message. I dialed my mom's number. She picked up on the fourth ring laughter and clinking glasses loud in the background. "Madeline, honey, what a surprise." Her voice was syrupy, like she'd already had a few drinks. "Where are you?" I kept my tone flat. "I'm at Denver General. Grandpa's in ICU. He was found severely dehydrated and hasn't taken his heart meds in weeks." The laughter on her end stopped. That can't be right. We made arrangements. Brandon's been checking on him. He hasn't. He said he would and never showed up. Grandpa's nurse hasn't been paid in over a month. She had to stop coming. My mom's voice shifted defensive now. "You weren't here. You left us to play soldier." "Brandon stepped in when you didn't." I ended the call before she could go further. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice calm as I asked the nurse at the desk for Grandpa's home nurse contact info. His chart still listed her Samantha Taylor. I found her number in his phone and stepped into the hallway to call. She picked up after 2 rings. "This is Samantha. Hi, this is Madeline Brooks. I'm Walter Brooks' granddaughter. I just got home from overseas and found him in bad shape. He's at the hospital now. I'm trying to understand what happened." She sounded weary. "Oh, Madeline, I'm so sorry. I stopped going 2 weeks ago. Your brother handled the payments, but the checks stopped coming 6 weeks back. I kept showing up unpaid for a while, but I've got a family of my own. I couldn't keep going." "Did you tell Brandon or my parents I left voicemails?" "I told Brandon your grandfather was missing meds, that he needed someone to help with food and hygiene. He said he was taking care of it, that he'd hired someone else, but he never gave me a name." "Because there wasn't anyone else was there." Her silence was answer enough. I thanked her and hung up, standing there in the hospital hallway as everything settled in. This wasn't just carelessness. This was something else. Later that night, when I was allowed to visit Grandpa again, he was awake but groggy. I sat beside him holding his hand while machines ticked and blinked around us. His voice was weak. "Maddie, you shouldn't be here. Your work—" I shook my head. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "When did you last see Brandon?" He blinked slowly. "Maybe a month. Dropped off groceries. Said he'd come back. But then, nothing. I thought maybe they were busy." His eyes closed again. I stayed with him until the nurse came in to check his vitals. Back in the waiting room, I opened my laptop and started looking into Grandpa's finances. I needed to know what had really been happening while I was gone. The next morning, I went back to his house. The front yard still looked like it hadn't seen a mower in months. Inside, dishes sat crusted in the sink stacks of unopened mail spilling across the counter. I sorted through the pile. Most were late notices, utility bills, property taxes, even warnings from the bank. Upstairs in his bedroom drawers had been rifled through, and I found a file folder tucked behind old sweaters in the closet. Inside were bank statements, savings, drained withdrawals made regularly over the last year, sometimes thousands at a time. The signature on several withdrawals wasn't Grandpa's. Brandon's name appeared again and again. In the basement, I found Grandpa's old desk. Dust coated nearly everything, but a stack of credit card receipts sat near the edge. Charges for restaurants, boutique, clothing stores, airline tickets. One receipt stood out, a $5,000 deposit at a resort in Hawaii, dated the same week Grandpa had collapsed. Another listed the sale of antique watches pieces I remembered Grandpa showing me when I was younger. The signature on the sale agreement matched Brandon's. I stood still holding the papers. This wasn't just neglect. This was theft. Then I remembered something Grandpa had once told me years back when I was heading off to my first deployment. He'd taken me downstairs, pointed to a small painting above the bookshelf. A mountain scene, he said, reminded him of his childhood. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should look behind it. The painting came off the wall with a soft creak. Behind it was a small wall safe. I tried his birthday first. Nothing. Then I typed mine, March 15th, 1995, and the lock clicked open. Inside were 2 folders, a flash drive, and a single sheet of paper with his handwriting, "Maddie watched this first." I took the drive upstairs and plugged it into his old laptop. The screen flickered. Then Grandpa's face appeared. His eyes were tired but steady. "If you're seeing this," he began, "then something's gone wrong." He talked about my parents leaning on him financially about Brandon borrowing money over and over. But then he went further. He said he'd created a trust one that could only be managed jointly by them as long as they acted in his best interest. If they failed, a clause in the agreement transferred full control to me. He'd set it up with his attorney, Matthew Lane. The folders in the safe held every document. The video ended with his voice softening. "You've always been steady, Maddie. You do what's right even when it's hard. I trust you to protect what matters." I sat back, the weight of everything pressing in, the lies, the neglect, the stolen money. But now I had proof. I'd be at that lawyer's office first thing in the morning. The next morning, I arrived at Matthew Lane's office just after 8. His building was a quiet brick structure downtown with ivy crawling up the side and a narrow wooden sign by the front steps. The receptionist, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and clear blue eyes, greeted me by name and said he was expecting me. I sat for less than 5 minutes before she waved me in. Matthew stood as I entered, tall, thin, a full head of gray hair combed neatly back. He offered a firm handshake and gestured for me to sit. "Your grandfather spoke of you often," he said, settling behind his desk. "He trusted you more than anyone." I nodded and placed the folders from the safe onto his desk, along with the USB drive. "He left this behind," I said, "and he's in the hospital, ICU. He nearly didn't make it." He listened as I explained everything: Grandpa's condition, the unpaid bills, Brandon's forged withdrawals, the Hawaii trip, the missing antiques. I kept my voice steady, walking him through each detail like I would a medical report. When I finished, I handed him the drive. He plugged it in, pulled up the video, and watched it in silence. By the end, his expression had changed. "This is more than enough to act," he said. "The clause in the trust is valid. We can file for emergency guardianship today and freeze all accounts." He began typing as he spoke, pulling forms from drawers and highlighting key sections. "We'll need a judge willing to see this fast. I'll call Veronica Hale. She's handled elder protection cases for decades. Your grandfather anticipated this. Everything he said lines up with what we're seeing." My phone buzzed twice while we worked calls from Brandon and my father. I let them go to voicemail. A moment later, another message came through. This time, Brandon's voice played through the speaker. "Maddie, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Let's talk. We can figure this out like a family." Matthew raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. I deleted the message and placed the phone face down. We had everything submitted by late morning: medical reports from the hospital, copies of bank statements, notarized documents from the trust, and an affidavit from me. Matthew arranged a hearing for early afternoon. "Judge Hale knows the situation," he said. "She'll move quickly." By 1:30, we were sitting in a quiet room outside her chambers. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the bench as I shifted my weight. A court officer called us in, and we entered a sunlit room lined with wooden panels and tall windows. Judge Hale sat at a long desk, reading through the documents in front of her. She was in her 60s, short gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, low on her nose. Her expression was unreadable as she flipped through the file. "This is a substantial claim," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "Miss Brooks, do you understand what you're asking for today?" "Yes, Your Honor. My grandfather is unable to advocate for himself. His accounts have been misused. His health nearly failed because no one stepped in." She nodded, tapped the pen on her desk, then turned to Matthew. He outlined the trust agreement, the terms of the clause, the timeline of withdrawals, the unpaid nursing care, and the video. He kept his tone professional, precise, laying everything out like a blueprint. When he finished, she sat back and looked at me again. "This is egregious," she said. "Temporary guardianship is granted to Miss Brooks, effective immediately. All accounts connected to Charles Brooks are to be frozen. A restraining order will bar Mr. Brandon Brooks and Richard and Karen Brooks from accessing or altering any of his assets until further review." I nodded, exhaling slowly. The gavel came down once. That was it. Outside, Matthew handed me a thick envelope. Certified copies of the order, he said. "Take one to the hospital today. Let them know you're now the point of contact." He paused. "This isn't over. Your family may push back hard, but the law is on your side now." By the time I reached the hospital, it was almost dusk. Grandpa was still in ICU, but his breathing had improved, and he was more alert. I stood beside him and placed a hand over his. "You don't have to worry anymore," I said quietly. "I've got it from here." A few hours later, while I was reviewing his chart with the nurse on duty, I heard footsteps down the hallway, fast and familiar. I turned and saw them, my mother, my father, and Brandon, all walking straight toward the ICU doors. They looked completely out of place, tanned from their vacation, still wearing summer clothes. My mom was the first to speak. "What is this nonsense? Legal papers, freezing our accounts." Her voice was sharp, too loud for the hallway. My father's face was red. "You've lost it, Madeline. You're staging some kind of military stunt." Brandon just stood with his hands in his pockets, wearing a button-up shirt and sunglasses pushed onto his head. "Grandpa wanted us to enjoy life. You're twisting this." I stepped in front of them, my back to Grandpa's room. "This is an ICU," I said quietly. "Keep your voices down. And if you came to see him, you'll have to wait. There's a restraining order in place." Brandon scoffed. "You've always had a hero complex. This isn't your decision. You stopped paying his nurse 6 weeks ago. You ignored his messages." "I have receipts. I have your name on withdrawals on antique sales. I'm not guessing anymore, Brandon." "I know." A nurse stepped into the hallway, glancing at me, then at them. My mom softened her voice. "We're his family. We deserve to be here." I didn't move. "You'll get your say in court, 30 days from now. Until then, the order stands." Brandon stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You're going to regret this." I didn't answer. Security was already on the way. They left without another word. Grandpa had been watching through the window. When I came back into the room, his eyes were wide, his hand gripping the edge of the blanket. "You sounded just like I used to," he whispered. I didn't say anything. I just pulled the chair closer and sat down beside him, the weight of the moment finally settling in. That night back at his house, I went through more drawers looking for anything else they might try to twist. In the bottom of a locked file cabinet, I found an unsigned mortgage application with Brandon's name typed in as co-signer. The home was paid off, but he'd tried to leverage it anyway. The application had been flagged by the bank for inconsistencies, but it was one more link in the chain. The next morning, Matthew called. "They moved fast," he said. "We've confirmed at least $150,000 was diverted over the past year. The documents match what we've already submitted. We're pushing forward." I sat in the basement, surrounded by Grandpa's old things books, framed photos, a box of medals from his service, and stared at the envelope in my hand. Every move from here on out had to count. By the time I stood to leave, I had a plan. I didn't sleep much that night. The house felt unfamiliar, even though I'd spent half my childhood in it. I sat in the basement just past midnight, surrounded by the open folders, the court papers from earlier, and the copies of the trust agreement. Grandpa's voice from that video still echoed in my ears. Upstairs, the old floorboards creaked every time the wind pushed against the siding. I'd spent deployments sleeping in sandstorms and tents rattling from helicopters overhead. But this silence carried a different kind of weight. I moved through the house quietly, checking every drawer and cabinet again, every corner of the place where Brandon might have left another paper trail. Around 3 in the morning, I made a list. I didn't write it on paper. I said it out loud like we used to during pre-mission briefings. 1, I had the power of attorney. 2, the accounts were frozen. 3, Brandon had forged documents. 4, Grandpa was stable and I needed to keep it that way. 5, I was not alone in this, not anymore. By 7, I was back at Matthew Lane's office with the full packet of financial records. He had already spoken to Judge Hale again and filed the request for permanent removal of my parents and Brandon from the trust. He also handed me a new document, an official accounting request. We'll need to show where every dollar went, he said. Start from the earliest withdrawals. Highlight everything that wasn't for Walter's benefit. I nodded and opened the spreadsheet on my laptop. The transactions stretched back 14 months. Travel agencies, jewelry stores, 2 separate payments to a landscaping service with no address. I flagged each one, then matched the dates to Brandon's social media. His trip to Las Vegas lined up with a $200 debit. A deposit to a car dealership landed 2 days before he posted a photo of himself beside a new convertible. I worked through lunch and into the afternoon. Matthew stopped by my chair a little after 4. "You've built a strong case," he said, "but if we want full restitution, we'll need help getting these documents into the right hands." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. Thomas Sheehan, a former Army buddy stationed now with the Denver County DA's office. He specialized in elder protection and financial fraud. We hadn't spoken since my last tour, but he picked up on the second ring. "Brooks, I thought you were still overseas. I'm stateside now. Got something I need to send you? It's bad. Elder abuse financial mostly, but there's neglect too. I've got bank records, forged documents, and a full affidavit from a nurse." He paused, then said, "Send everything. I'll take a look." I emailed the packet over within the hour. Thomas called back the next morning. "We're opening a case," he said. "Nothing official yet, but your evidence is solid. If we dig further and find cause, it could lead to felony charges." That same day, I drove to the hospital to check on Grandpa. His color had improved. He was awake when I walked in, sitting upright with a nurse adjusting his oxygen line. I waited until she left, then pulled the visitor chair closer. "They came here, didn't they?" he asked. "They tried, but they didn't get past me." He nodded slowly. "I never wanted this to fall on you." "You prepared for it," I said. "You knew what they were capable of." I hoped I was wrong. That night, I sat on the back porch of his house with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a warm mug between my hands. The backyard was overgrown, but the wind still moved through it the same way it always had. I kept replaying one moment from Iraq in my mind, a night patrol where we lost radio contact and stumbled into a trap. I'd been the one to spot the wires first. We made it out because I didn't hesitate. The next morning, I logged into Facebook and drafted a post. I uploaded 2 photos side by side. One was Grandpa pale and thin, hooked up to an IV in the ICU. The other was Brandon and my parents clinking glasses at a beachside table in Hawaii. The caption read, "While my grandfather starved, they celebrated. This is what elder neglect looks like." I hesitated before clicking post. Then I tapped the screen once, locked the phone, and stood up. It didn't take long. Within a few hours, comments started coming in old neighbors, friends from school, even a few of Brandon's former co-workers. People shared the post, asked questions, expressed outrage. Some messaged privately to say they'd noticed things but hadn't known what to do. By evening, the post had been shared over 100 times. One reply from a local community board stood out: "If you need legal support or help with elder advocacy, we're here. Reach out." I showed the post to Matthew the next day. He nodded. "This will help. Public awareness puts pressure on the DA's office, on the judge, even on their employers. It matters." Then he handed me a new folder. Inside was a printout from the county clerk's office. They tried to file a challenge, he said, claiming the trust clause was invalid. I opened it. Their filing had been denied. "Next court hearing is in 2 weeks, he said. "We'll go in with everything." He closed the folder and looked at me. Are you ready for what comes after I folded the papers and placed them in my bag? Yes, I said. I am. By the end of that week, the momentum had shifted. The temporary guardianship order was in effect, and the court had acknowledged the financial discrepancies. But paperwork alone wouldn't stop what Brandon and my parents had done. They still had influence friends in the community, business contacts, people who didn't know the truth. I knew if I wanted lasting change, I'd have to speak louder than they ever expected me to. I started by filing a formal request with Judge Hale to begin a full audit of every account attached to Grandpa's trust. Matthew had already organized the documentation line by line and submitted our petition to make the temporary guardianship permanent. But we both agreed that legal pressure wasn't enough. We needed to make the pattern of behavior visible not just in a courtroom, but out in the open. That same afternoon, I updated the original Facebook post. I added photos of Grandpa's past, him teaching me how to sand wood in the garage, holding a fish on a summer trip to Lake Dillon, smiling with a birthday cake in front of him. Then, I wrote a short paragraph beneath those memories explaining that the man in the ICU wasn't just some forgotten elder. He was a father, a grandfather, and a veteran who deserved better than to be left behind. The post took off again. More shares, more comments. Some people wrote in shock, saying they had no idea what had happened. Others asked how to report elder abuse in their own towns. I received messages from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. A few were from Brandon's former co-workers. One of them even said she'd forwarded the post to his supervisor. 2 days later, Brandon's employer, a real estate firm in Arvada, announced he was under internal review. I didn't hear that from Brandon. I heard it from a neighbor who ran into me outside the hospital and said I didn't know you were related to him. What he did, it's awful. That night I met Thomas Sheehan at a diner just outside downtown. He slid a folder across the table with his usual quiet focus. "We've opened an official case," he said. "We're treating it as both elder abuse and financial exploitation. Brandon's name is on every major transaction. If it goes to court, it'll be a felony charge." "Are my parents part of it?" I asked. He nodded once. "Complicity. Their signatures are on some of the trust paperwork. The DA will likely name them in the financial fraud side of the case." The waitress came by with our coffee. I sipped mine slowly, thinking about how fast the walls were closing in on them, not because of revenge, but because every action left a paper trail. The next morning, I returned to Grandpa's house to organize more records. While sorting through his office, I found a series of emails printed and clipped together. At first glance, they looked like standard correspondence between Brandon and a bank representative. But one message caught my attention. It referenced a second mortgage application that Grandpa never knew about. The bank had flagged it and rejected the loan. Brandon had forged Grandpa's signature again. I scanned the papers and sent them to Matthew right away. Within the hour, he called and confirmed the application was already in the county system under review. This strengthens everything he said, not just the financial abuse, but intent. This wasn't neglect. It was a planned extraction. I didn't respond right away. My hands were already moving, pulling more files from the cabinet, cataloging each item like I was back in a triage tent. For weeks in Iraq, we'd operated on instinct, moving through pressure, organizing what we could, stabilizing the rest. That instinct came back now, but this time it was Grandpa I was trying to protect. 2 days before the next court hearing, I received an email from someone I didn't recognize. It was a neighbor from 3 doors down. She said she'd seen my parents sneaking around the backyard at night earlier that week trying to get into the garage. She didn't confront them, but she recognized their voices and thought I should know. I checked the security system I'd installed. Sure enough, the motion sensor near the side entrance had triggered at 11:42 p.m. I forwarded the report to Thomas and attached the neighbor's message. That evening, I went by the hospital to check on Grandpa. He was sitting up in bed. His tray cleared a puzzle book open in front of him. "I saw the post," he said without looking up. "One of the nurses showed me." "Brave thing to do. You taught me to speak up," I said. He looked at me and nodded. "You're doing right by me. That's more than I can say for the rest of them." I stayed for an hour. When I left, I noticed Brandon's car parked across the street from the hospital, engine running, lights off. I didn't approach him. I just noted the time, took a photo, and walked back to my truck. Later that night, I drafted a short email to Matthew and Thomas. The subject line was simple: next move. I listed everything we had so far: court order, financial evidence, video testimony, the attempted break-in, Brandon's forged documents. I ended the email with one sentence: I want to proceed with full guardianship and restitution. Matthew replied the next morning, "We're ready. See you in court." The morning of the hearing. Denver's courthouse was quieter than I expected. The hallways were dim under soft fluorescent light, and every door echoed when it closed. I sat beside Matthew Lane at the long wooden table folders, stacked neatly in front of us, each one labeled and tabbed. Across the aisle, my parents and Brandon filed in just after 9, dressed like they were headed to brunch instead of a courtroom. My mother wore a silk scarf, her makeup carefully done. My father didn't look at me. Brandon gave a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Judge Hale entered promptly at 9:15. She didn't waste time. "We are here to determine the validity of the emergency guardianship granted to Ms. Madeline Brooks and to review the petition for permanent authority over the trust of Mr. Walter Brooks. Let's proceed." Matthew began by laying out the timeline: how I'd returned on emergency leave, how I found my grandfather neglected the nurse's resignation due to non-payment, the financial records pointing to abuse. He presented bank statements, screenshots of transactions, and the flagged mortgage application. Then he submitted the signed affidavit from Nurse Samantha Taylor and copies of communications between Brandon and the Trust's financial institutions. Judge Hale flipped through each document slowly. Her expression didn't change, but she underlined more than once and paused at the photograph of Grandpa in the hospital bed. "This evidence suggests deliberate financial misconduct," she said. "I'll need to hear from Ms. Brooks directly." I stood and addressed the bench hands folded in front of me. "Your Honor, I was overseas serving as a combat medic when I received a voicemail from my grandfather. His voice was weak. He said no one was answering. I came home on emergency leave and found him unconscious, dehydrated, and severely malnourished. The nurse who had been caring for him hadn't been paid in weeks. His medications were untouched. His house was falling apart. Meanwhile, my family was on vacation in Hawaii." The judge nodded. "And you are now his primary caregiver?" "Yes, ma'am. I've moved him closer to my station. I check on him daily. His condition is stable. His finances are being managed according to the Trust's guidelines. I filed every required report with Mr. Lane." She thanked me and turned to Brandon. "Mr. Brooks, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Brandon rose, tugging at his blazer sleeve. "Your Honor, this has all been blown out of proportion. My grandfather always supported our family. The money was used to keep things going during a tough year. I didn't intend harm. We thought we had things covered while Madeline was away." The judge lifted a page. "This document here, this is a signed mortgage application in your name. You attempted to refinance a fully paid-off property belonging to Mr. Walter Brooks." Brandon shifted. "That was a misunderstanding. I never finalized it." "But you submitted it," she said, her voice level. My parents spoke next. My mother described the financial pressures they'd faced, how difficult it had been coordinating care from out of state. My father blamed poor communication and said they'd trusted Brandon to handle the details. We assumed, he added, that things were being managed responsibly. Judge Hale looked at them both. "You were listed as co-executors of the trust. That's not a ceremonial title. It carries fiduciary responsibility." She took a pause, then reviewed the final document, Grandpa's video testimony, which I'd submitted ahead of time. She didn't play it aloud in court, but she summarized its content for the record. Mr. Walter Brooks expressed clear intent to transfer control to Ms. Brooks in the event of negligence or abuse. He feared misuse and made provisions accordingly. That clause is valid, and what I see here justifies activating it permanently. Brandon's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. My mother placed a hand on his arm. The judge continued, "Based on the evidence, I am permanently removing Richard Caron and Brandon Brooks as trustees and co-executors. All authority over Mr. Walter Brooks's financial and medical decisions is hereby granted to Madeline Brooks. Additionally, all 3 former executors are to have no access to trust funds or related properties moving forward. Any attempts to breach this order will be treated as a violation and referred to the DA's office." The sound of the gavel was quick but final. As the courtroom emptied, my mother stopped near the table. Her eyes were red. "Madeline, how could you do this to your own family?" I didn't flinch. "You did this to yourselves." Brandon didn't say a word. My father muttered something I didn't catch, and the 3 of them left together, shoulders drawn in. Matthew placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "It's done," he said. "At least this part." We stepped out into the hallway. I took one slow breath and looked up through the high windows. It was early afternoon. The sky was clear. That evening I returned to Grandpa's house to start the next stage recovery. But just after midnight my phone buzzed. The security system had triggered. Someone had entered through the side gate. I pulled up the camera feed. It was Brandon. He was in the garage rummaging through drawers. Within minutes the alarm went off and the police arrived. They detained him just outside the back door. He told them he was retrieving family paperwork, but the officers had already seen the restraining order. I signed the statement at the station the next morning. That violation only strengthened the order already in place. When I returned to the hospital, Grandpa was sitting in a chair near the window. The sunlight hit his shoulder and cast a soft line across his blanket. "I heard they tried to break in," he said. "They did," I replied. "But they didn't get far." He nodded slow but sure. "You sounded like me in my prime." I sat beside him and handed over the papers confirming the court's decision. He placed his hand over mine and gave one firm squeeze. The court's ruling triggered more than just silence from my family. Within a week, the DA's office filed formal charges against Brandon embezzlement, forgery, elder abuse. The paper trail was undeniable. Over $150,000 misused or unaccounted for, including trust funds, medical savings, and asset sales. Thomas Sheehan called to let me know that my parents wouldn't face full felony charges, but were named in the financial misconduct. They'd signed off on documents that enabled Brandon's actions, and they'd benefited from the funds. Their part in it couldn't be ignored even if they hadn't forged the papers themselves. Restitution proceedings started almost immediately. Brandon's bank accounts were frozen, and a lien was placed on his home. The convertible he'd posted online weeks before I came home was sold through the court. The proceeds didn't come close to covering what he owed, but it was a start. Word traveled fast. His job didn't wait for the legal outcome. He was officially terminated after internal ethics concerns were raised. My mother's book club quietly removed her name from the monthly hosting list. My father's Saturday golf group stopped inviting him. No arguments, no formal goodbye, just distance. Meanwhile, Grandpa's recovery was slow but steady. He needed a walker to move around and his breath caught more easily now, but he was sleeping through the night eating again and laughing more usually at the local paper's crossword puzzle, which he never filled in correctly, but insisted he solved in his head. 6 weeks after the hearing, we moved him into a smaller house on the edge of town, closer to the VA clinic, and just a short drive from the base where I'd been reassigned. It was a one-story ranch with wide doors and a shaded front porch. The backyard backed up to a row of pine trees and a feeder where sparrows gathered in the early hours. The first morning in the new place, I brought him tea just before 8. He was already up-dressed, sitting at the kitchen table and looking out the window. "I like this," he said, tapping the mug once before taking a sip. "It's quiet here, the kind of quiet you can trust." That same day, Matthew forwarded a letter from the court confirming that the trust had been fully transferred into my care. The accounts were separated, secured, and audited. I was granted permanent power of attorney with full oversight. The letter came with one final note. The disinheritance clause in the original will had been activated. Brandon, along with my parents, had forfeited all rights to Grandpa's estate. They didn't respond to that directly. Instead, I started getting calls from old family friends, people who'd heard bits of the story and were now hearing the rest. A few of them said they didn't know what to believe. I didn't argue. I just said the documents were public record now. Brandon tried one last time to reach me. A voicemail left around midnight. His voice was quieter, this time slower. "You're tearing the family apart," he said. "Don't you see that? You could have handled this privately. We all make mistakes." I deleted it. Then I drafted a follow-up post. Not angry, just clear. I included a photo of Grandpa on the porch, a mug in his hands, the sun coming through the trees behind him. I added a few lines beneath it. He didn't need money. He needed care. He didn't need a vacation. He needed someone to answer the phone. The post reached more people than I expected. A local elder advocacy group asked to share it on their site. Someone from the state's Office of Aging called to ask if I'd consider speaking at an awareness seminar later in the year. I said yes, not for attention, just because more people needed to see what this looked like before it was too late. That weekend, while Grandpa was napping, I boxed up the last few items from his old house. Most of it had already been donated, but there were a few pieces. I kept his watch from the railroad, years the wooden duck he carved when I was 6, and the small brass bell that used to hang from the back door. I rang it once before packing it, just to hear the sound. Fall came early that year. The first morning frost dusted the edge of Grandpa's porch steps, and the birds at the feeder moved a little slower between sips. He was bundled in a flannel shirt and knit cap, a blanket over his knees. I brought out his tea and sat beside him, both of us watching the pine needles shift in the breeze. He didn't say much anymore, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't feel the need. He'd lived a long life. He'd taught school, raised a child, buried a wife, and helped raise a granddaughter who once thought the world was something she needed to earn her way into. He looked peaceful now, with no alarms, no notices taped to the door, no hollow promises hanging between phone calls. I'd taken a new position at the base hospital not far from his house. It wasn't as intense as my deployment work, but that was fine. These days, I liked the quiet shifts. I liked knowing I could get to him in under 15 minutes if I needed to. The legal case against Brandon was still moving through the courts. There were hearings, filings, a restitution schedule that would take years to complete. But I wasn't following it like I used to. That part of the story had already closed for me the day the judge named me guardian and executor, when the responsibility finally aligned with the reality I'd been carrying alone for too long. My parents never called again. The last message came a month ago, a letter unsigned with no return address. Just a folded sheet that said, "We didn't mean for it to end like this." I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because there are some things you don't walk back from. Sometimes people ask if I regret how far I took it, if I wish I'd handled it quieter. I tell them my grandfather was dying, and the people who should have protected him chose comfort over care. If I had shown up a week later, he might not have made it, and no vacation photo in the world makes that okay. I didn't set out to be anyone's judge. I just refused to let silence become the legacy he left behind. Now most mornings are simple. I bring his tea. We watch the sparrows. We talk about nothing in particular. His health is steady, his bills are paid, and he knows without needing to ask that he's safe. I guess if this story means anything, it's this love is not a feeling. It's a task, a showing up, a picking up the phone, a staying when it's inconvenient. And justice. Sometimes it's loud, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a granddaughter at the kitchen table, balancing accounts, making appointments, keeping promises that someone else broke. So if you're listening and there's someone in your life you've been meaning to check on, do it. Show up. Ask questions. Look a little closer at the things that don't feel right. Thanks for walking this road with me. If this story touched something in you, share it. Or just let me know where you're listening from. I always like hearing who's out there, and take care of each other.